So at this point, the biggest obstacle from us progressing is the fact that we don't have our database set up. So that's what we're going to do in this section. So I've just opened up MySQL Workbench, which we'll be using to create our database, but any SQL editor will do. So the first thing we're going to do is create a new database, and we're going to call this shortener. And I'm just going to set this as our active database. Now we've obviously created two tables, or we need to create two tables rather. One called links, and the other one that we will create later is called track. Within our links table we only have three fields. We have the short URL, we have the URL itself, and the created time, or the created timestamp rather. Our short URL is only going to be 15 characters long, so we can create this as a varchar 15. Our URL can be much longer, and so we're going to set this at 100. Finally, our timestamp, we can create this as an integer and set this to 11. So if we create this table now, we would be able to see our actual database, but we actually want to make our short URL our primary key. So to do that, we just need to type primary key. We should probably also set all of these to not null as well. Because we don't want any of them to be able to be recorded without all of the data that we require. So if we create this database now, and then we look at the database itself, these are the three fields that we actually created in our PHP file. And so our next task is to create the track table. Delete all of that. So we have quite a lot of different fields within our track table. We have the short URL, we have the request time, we have the remote address, the server protocol, HTTPS, the HTTP user agent, the referrer, and that was it. The short URL we can set as varchar 15 because that's the limit that we imposed from the other table. And apart from the request time, all of the others are also going to be varchars. The request time is going to be an integer though, which is going to be 11 long because that's the length of our timestamp. So the only other things that we need to change are the lengths of the actual varchars. And so if we create this table now, and then if we also look at the table, you can see that these are the fields that we created within our user data section. If you really wanted to, you could also link the short URL from the track table to the short URL in the link table. But we're not going to do that for now. What we can do, however, is test out the functionality that we've already got. So there are still a few things that we need to do within this page to make it fully functional. So if you remember, we haven't actually created the session states part. We said that we would come back to that here. So all we need to do is to create a PHP section here. And what we're going to do is we're going to check if the session is set. We're going to look at the response specifically, as well as the state being set. And if this is true, then we know that we've actually just recorded or tried to record a new entry, and so we should display one of the two dialog boxes that we're going to create now. If these two are both blank, we don't want to display any dialog boxes. We want to allow our user to input straight away. So what we're going to do is we're going to test if the session state is error. Then we're going to echo out a section which will actually display our error message. And we're going to get that error message from our session response. In every other instance, we're going to output an error message. Or rather, I said that wrong, didn't I? In this first instance, we want to output an error message. In this second instance, we want to output the actual data, which won't be an error message. It will be a confirmation of the fact that we've just created a link. We're going to output that inside an input box. I'm going to make this read only as well to make sure that we don't accidentally delete or change the link that we're going to pass back. And we also need to put down here in our short URL field a pre-generated short URL, echo s generate code. And that will inherit every function within the shortener class from this object that we create up here. So there's only one thing left to do, and that's to test this part out. So if we create a new link now to google.co.uk and shorten, we can see that we obviously haven't got the confirmation box working properly. So we can go and look at that. And we can also see that this hasn't incremented properly. And so it turns out that we actually haven't finished our code. So actually, after we've created our instance, we need to actually check and insert the data. And so we can do that by if insert So this should try to insert if the URL is provided when the page refreshes. If we reload this now, you can see that we've created this link. I'll just also test out the functionality for the overriding our link. And if we refresh our table now, we can see both of these have worked correctly. And this is our timestamps which we passed across. If we accidentally use the same short URL, we should get an error message, yes. And again, because we've used the URL as the input type here, we couldn't do just google.com because this isn't a valid HTML URL. It does need to have the HTTP or HTTPS at the start of the link to be considered a valid URL. And so we can see that the generate code feature is working correctly. The add link function is working correctly. We haven't tried to resolve any short URLs yet, nor have we used the get user data or store user data functions. And we'll be looking at these three functions and actually implementing them in the next video, so stay tuned. If the URL isn't a directory or a file or a link to another file somewhere else on our computer, it's going to actually rewrite our URL for us.